Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Roller Coaster Week in our nation's capital. I've got the good news, the bad news, the Groundhog Day news, and then news where our country will either meet the historic challenges of the moment or not. And so let me get through each of these with some opening comments and then be happy to take your questions. First, in terms of the good news, I think the fact that Virginians voted to reject extremism, to protect women's health care choices, to protect your right to vote, to protect the fact that we ought to have sensible gun laws, was a great outcome on Tuesday night. The fact that for the first time in some time, actually, that the Democrats will once again control the Senate and the House, I think is a real step to make sure that Virginia keeps moving forward. I know there's been lots of analysis already on why this happened, but I do think it was not only about the abortion issue, but and I think that issue was overwhelming, that people are tired of politicians messing with women's health care choices. But I think it was more than that. I think it was the fact that, and I've not gone through all of the school board races yet, but I think increasingly, Virginia parents, Virginia voters are saying they want to focus on the teachers having the tools to teach in the classrooms and not to bring all of the social culture wars into our classrooms, or not to have schools start banning and prohibiting books. I also think that some of the challenges and the craziness of the Republican brand at this point rubbed off. I mean, Virginia obviously has a lot of federal employees. It has a huge number of defense establishments in Hampton Roads. There's very few states that are as reliant on the federal government as Virginia. And I think the craziness of the House, the extreme positions of the MAGA wing, are frighten Virginians. And the truth is that even if some members of the General Assembly or even the governor were trying to present moderate faces, they've seen that this right-wing extreme group, which drives the bus now here in Washington, where unfortunately moderate Republican senators, moderate Republican House members are constantly cut off at the knees, people across Virginia didn't trust that a complete Republican control in Richmond wouldn't lead to the same kind of extreme positions that you see coming out of the House of Representatives at this point. So I think it was a good day for Virginia. I think it was a good day for democracy. That was the good part of the week. The bad was something I wasn't totally surprised at, but the fact that last night there was an announcement that the administration had chosen Maryland over FBI, chosen Maryland over Virginia for the FBI selection, was outrageous. I mean, Virginia clearly was the better case. Virginia clearly was winning the first set of criteria. The fact that political pressure was put on to try to change the criteria, really stunk. But even I was shocked when this morning you see the director of the FBI put forward an unprecedented communication to all FBI employees about how corrupt this process was. The fact that you've got 3 career professionals, 2 representing GSA and 1 representing the FBI, coming together, even with the new criteria, and still choosing Virginia, only to have that overridden by a political appointee is outrageous. This is the kind of behavior I expected from the Trump administration, but I think we all expect better from the current administration. And we'll be calling for an inspector general review. I would hope the administration would initiate that on their own as these facts have come out. And you'll be hearing a united Virginia voice from the governor to bipartisan members of the federal delegation weighing in on this issue in the next hour or so. But this is a long-term decision that has to be in the best interest of the men and women who work at the FBI. The FBI is under enormous assault, again, from some political extremes. The idea that those needs of the FBI are not going to be taken into consideration, and on all of the other criteria where even the GSA career officials thought Virginia was the better choice, this whole process, I think, needs to be thrown out and restarted. In terms of Groundhog's Day, we are now about a week away from a potential another government shutdown, and out of the House, you get a different plan each day. This idea that you would have a series of government shutdowns is absurd, and responsible members of both parties have called it such. Again, we not only in Virginia, but candidly in the district in Maryland as well, we get slammed the worst on government shutdowns. We get slammed even on continuing resolutions. So I know there are enormous negotiations going on right now, in terms of what kind of CR for how long, because it's clear we're not going to reach the full-on budget agreement before next week. But it's, again, it's Groundhog's Day, and people ought to deserve and demand better. And then in terms of the historic choices we're making, we, or at least I, firmly support Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas terrorists after the brutal events of October 7th. But I've also been calling for a cessation of hostilities, a short term, a pause, whichever terminology you want to use, to make sure that we can get aid and assistance into Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere who have literally taken on thousands and thousands of casualties. I'm proud to see that just today the Israeli government has announced a daily 4-hour pause. I think that's appropriate. I think that's clearly in the interest of the Palestinian citizens. I also think it's candidly in the long-term interest of the Israeli government as well, because keeping public opinion, keeping American support, keeping, frankly, not having the whole region explode into a regional war is critical that we provide this assistance to innocent Palestinian civilians. I also joined a group of my colleagues as well, calling on the Israeli government to shut down some of this violence being perpetrated by settlers in the West Bank. The truth is, these settlers murdering Palestinians, that could lead to literally a whole second front in this war if the Palestinian security services all quit. And again, the Israeli government at least put out a statement yesterday saying they will try to rein in this kind of settler violence. I also think this draws upon a larger issue as well of what we've seen in our nation, as we see Americans of Muslim faith, Americans of Israeli or of Jewish faith, and supporters of Israel or supporters of Palestine, literally being afraid to go to work, being afraid on college campuses. I absolutely do not support those who call for Hamas victory or those who call for the extinction of Israel. But I also don't support the fact of just because you are Arab American or Muslim American that you don't have First Amendment rights. I don't support students at Cornell who are Jewish being afraid to go to class or on campuses, unfortunately, across the country. I think we as a nation are being tested, and I think we have to stand up against anti-Semitism. I think we have to stand up against anti-Islamophobia, and I think we need to find a way to also preserve those First Amendment rights. We are a unique experiment in this country where people from different faiths, different backgrounds, different countries all come together in this extraordinary American melting pot. And I've seen that stress on that American melting pot in the last month since the horrible activities of October 7th in a way that is, again, unprecedented. And we have to stand up against hatred and bigotry regardless of where it originates. And while we need to make sure that we get this humanitarian aid to the Palestinians and we need to support Israel's right to defend itself, we cannot, and I think this is as historic a moment as any since I've been in the Senate, we cannot take our eyes off of the brutal aggression of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. And I point out the Putin governments who's promoted anti-Semitism, the fact that on Russian airports recently there were groups trying to come out and kill Jews that had come from Israel. Make no mistake that Vladimir Putin and his government, which has had previous ties and connections with, whether it would be with Hamas, a clear ally with Iran, if America were to walk away from its commitment to Ukraine at this point, the way some in the House and a few in the Senate would propose, we would be undermined in a historic way. I don't think any nation state, ally or enemy, would ever trust our word again, particularly after the courage of the Ukrainian people to literally destroy half of Russia's military capacity. And again, the most absurd comment, these are the people who I work with up here who couldn't pass Geopolitics 101, who say they don't have any problem with Putin winning in Ukraine, but they got huge concerns about President Xi and the Communist Party in China. If you don't get the fact that if an authoritarian wins in Russia or Iran or China, they all win. And failure to understand that kind of connection is either political blindness or just a complete lack of understanding of how the real world works. So apologize for going on a little bit, but there's lots and lots on our plate, and I'll be happy to turn it over to Laura now for questions.
Senator, our first question will be Mitchell Miller with WTOP. As a reminder to please mute your devices unless you are asking the question. Please mute your devices. Mitchell, you're up.
Thank you, Senator, for joining us. I wanted to ask you, related to the FBI, do you think, given the questions that are lingering, should the GSA Inspector General review this process? And given these questions, do you think that moving forward, is this going to slow the development of this and the appropriations process related to the new FBI headquarters?
Well, I'm going to answer that, Mitchell, but I would ask, I've had a hard time hearing everything. I'd ask all of the other callers to please give me and the questioner the courtesy of turning off your audio on these devices. One, of course there needs to be an Inspector General investigation. How do you have, after all the political interference, all three of the career professionals pick Virginia and then have a political appointee overturn that decision, and an unprecedented response from the director of the FBI saying FBI equities have not been observed at all? My hope is, we in Virginia will call for this. My hope is that folks in Maryland and folks in the Biden administration would call for it as well. And the craziness of this, and this was going to be a heavy lift regardless. You've got a big group in the House at this point that want to do everything they can to undermine the FBI, that we're going to be really challenged to try to have this project, regardless of whether it went to Maryland or Virginia, move forward. But with this enormous cloud over this decision, it's time to go back to the drawing board, and it's time to make sure that we take the politics out of this, that we do what's in the best interest of the men and women who work at the FBI, we do what's in the best interest of American taxpayers, we do what's in the best interest of advancing equity, and get a decision that can stand the sunlight that now is coming into this process.
Senator, our next question will be Katie Leslie with NBC4. Katie?
Hi, Senator. Thank you for having time for us. You touched on what
Go ahead, Katie.
Thank you. It's just a continuation of the prior question. Can you kind of walk us through the steps available to you in terms of, appropriations? What realistically is the recourse now?
Well, there is, I'm not sure, with this kind of cloud hanging over this process. Tell me how a House that was already questioning this whole process, questioning the FBI, we've been saying literally, even when there was a political interference in the appropriations process a year ago, and there was an attempt to try to add new criteria, and we said no, all this meant was a new review, and even with the new criteria, Virginia won. The career professionals, GSA, FBI said Virginia won. And now you've got this political decision. This is the kind of behavior I'd expect from the Trump administration. I expected better from this administration.
Forgive the follow-up, but I'm sorry, just what is the Maryland, because Senator Kaine couldn't really answer this. Why do you think Maryland would be the preference for this, or the target of this political influence? Why Maryland?
There's been clear kind of effort to politicize this from some of the advocates of the Maryland case. I don't want to, listen, I said to the two Maryland senators who I work well with, I thought they operated within the bounds of, tough competition. I can't say that about everyone on the Maryland side, but again, we are where we are. This process has not worked. You've got clear political interference that now appears to be documented. You've got the FBI director in an unprecedented communication to all FBI employees calling it out. And if anybody questioned the independence of the FBI, I think that ought to be put to rest, and at least in terms of the director saying he's going to stand up for the men and women who work there. So let's figure out how we go from here, but we need that investigation to figure out how this process got so off the tracks.
We're going to move on to Adam Longo with WUSA 9.
Hi, Senator. Good afternoon. Thank you for doing this. The first thing that I wanted to ask you, in his letter to the FBI employees, Director Wray was accusing a GSA executive of this potential malfeasance, accusing them of having a conflict of interest in that they used to be an employee of WMATA. Do you have any information that suggests any sort of coordination between this GSA employee and WMATA? Secondly, just to ask about the process and the IG report and how it plays out from here, we already had 145 Republicans last night vote for an amendment to defund this project altogether. Do you think that this renewed back and forth now between Virginia and Maryland can harm the process even further? Thank you.
Well, first of all, in terms of the official that the FBI director called out, I don't have any additional information about that. But again, if you've got the FBI director making this accusation, I know Chris Wray. I was pretty shocked to see him make that claim. I don't have any further background on that, but he's been a career professional. So again, I think it speaks for itself. The notion as well, you got 145 folks who, even if this process had been appropriate, trying to defund it, and now you have this cloud over it. What really is, the real losers at this moment are the men and women who work for the FBI, who work in a headquarters building that's a hazard zone, that work in a headquarters building that's a mess and antiquated and doesn't allow them to do their job properly. So if this gets postponed for multiple additional years, I feel the most for the men and women of the FBI.
Senator, our next question is Margaret Barthel with WAMU.
Yeah, thank you,
Margaret?
Senator. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm curious if you have been in touch with any of your colleagues on the Maryland side of the House, and if so, if any of them feel share your concerns about the integrity of the process.
Yeah, I have not had those conversations yet. We are. I've seen one of my Maryland colleagues, but we were in a pretty intense conversation about how we keep the government open and how we don't allow some folks to, particularly from some of the House Republicans and unfortunately some of the Senate Republicans, from selling out Ukraine at this moment in time. And as important as this discussion is about the FBI headquarters dealing with conflicts in Ukraine, the Middle East, threats from China, and keeping the government open takes a little bit of precedence.
Our next question is Michael Martz with the Richmond Times-Dispatch.
Yes, Senator. Following up on the FBI thing yet again, what is I've asked this question of Senator Kaine. I mean, you're talking about political interference, and where exactly would it be coming from to put this senior GSA official in a position to countermand the process or the decision of the panel, unless that was the desire of someone above that person? Right? Is there any evidence that this alleged bias goes higher than this one official?
Listen, that's why we need an investigation. I will tell you this, Tim and I, with our Maryland colleagues, we've been wrestling with this for a while. We had when some Maryland member of the House held up all of government funding last Christmas, and we came to an agreement that there would be, we got whacked a little bit on some funding issue. There was, I believe, an agreement not to reopen the whole criteria, and yet that Virginia and Maryland would get and make one more presentation. Strangely enough, the criteria were still changed, even though that had been, I believe, litigated. How that happened, really, I still don't know. And the remarkable thing, Michael, is that even after that, almost effort to cook the books, we still came forward trying to meet the 5 criteria that the GSA and the FBI came forward with. We had the governor, we had our business community, we had the variety of community that make up around Springfield, people of different faiths, people from different racial backgrounds, and we made, I think, a good presentation. And what was the evidence of that is, with the independent evaluators, we won. Now, how'd we end up with something leaking out last night where we didn't even get the courtesy or heads-up call ahead of time? That's why, particularly in light of what the FBI director has charged, we need this. We need to get the facts. I think the American taxpayers, deserve that. But most importantly, the men and women of the FBI deserve that.
Senator, our next question is Alexia Stanbridge with WSET.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Okay. So the GOP is wanting to take money from the IRS to help fund Israel. We've heard some other people like Schumer against it. What are your thoughts on that? And also, as a follow-up, what does the end of this conflict even look like?
Well, first of all, the very folks who are trying to take away funding from the IRS claim they're fiscal conservatives, claim they want to go after the deficit. Truth is, and don't believe me, the Congressional Budget Office, which is the scorer and the referee, said, give more money to the IRS. You actually cut the deficit dramatically because people who owe their taxes pay their taxes. So to put forward this political stunt of saying, let's give Israel aid, but at the same time actually add to the deficit, and that's what the CBO score said, was a complete non-starter. Even privately, a lot of my Senate Republican friends laughed at that. So that's dead. The question now is, and I'm in favor of finding accommodation with our Republican friends on the border. We've got to make the border stronger. We can't have the kind of flow of people, and the process currently that we have doesn't work. So count me in. on reaching accommodation with the Republicans there. But the idea that we would walk away from Ukraine or walk away from the humanitarian assistance that's needed, and yes, we need to fund Israel, but we need to recognize this is a moment in American and world history when there are more things happening with potential conflict in Asia, real actual conflict in Ukraine that could bleed into NATO, conflict in the Middle East that could go beyond Gaza to the West Bank and unfortunately potentially Iran. We don't need politics now. We need people who will do their job. And my hope is, and that we will get that job done. And the idea of holding government funding hostage for political stunts, it's one of the reasons why Democrats won in the election on Tuesday, because I think they felt no matter what Republicans would say, they would pull the same antics in Richmond that they're pulling in Washington. Now, I don't know if that would come to pass, but it was, I think the message was sent loud and clear. And I do appreciate some questions on the elections. I mean, it is pretty remarkable that we're talking about something that none of you predicted 3 weeks ago, 6 months ago, or 9 months ago. And I know it happened, way, way back in time, like Tuesday night at midnight when this became clear, but that's a pretty significant event as well.
Senator, our next question is Doug Boynton with WHRO. Doug? Okay, we're going to move on to Nicholas Balassi with Just the News.
Thanks for taking the question. Appreciate it. Senator, as we've heard you talk about, how the Biden administration changed the criteria last minute due to what you described as political pressure. I'm just wondering if you could expand on, kind of how you see that having unfolded. And do you think the GSA's equity action plan guided their decision, this political appointee's decision to choose Maryland over Virginia?
Well, first of all, I know my staff is looking through. I've not had a chance to look through the document that I think we got this morning, mid-time, way after the announcement had been made. I mean, that alone is a huge process foul. And again, I guess I would recharacterize a bit of your question. I had political interference. I've had political concerns about interference back to when last Christmas, when there was an attempt to change the criteria, and that attempt was defeated. Yet there was still a change in criteria. But a lot of this recent, a lot of the news today, not coming from me in terms of these charges, it's coming from the director of the FBI. So we need that investigation. We need to find out what happened. We need to figure out who influenced what. And at the end of the day, I would hope from this administration, which I'm a huge supporter of, that they'll do the right thing. The notion that I'm comparing these actions to an action from the Trump administration, that is, I regret the fact that I have to make that comparison.
Senator, our next question is Amy Knowles with the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. I respect your time, and I don't want to get in trouble, so I have a decision for you. I have either a more serious question or a purely fun one prepared, so which would you prefer?
Well, Amy, considering, this has been a pretty darn serious week in terms of highs and lows, and I'll take the fun question. Of course, if I flub it, I'll go back to the serious one and give you a 20-minute policy dissertation. But go ahead, Amy.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'm hoping this works out then. I know that the tuna melt is your go-to, but is there a second Warner family recipe that you could share with the people of Virginia as we're preparing our menus for Thanksgiving?
Well, I'm a pretty plain cheeseburger guy as well, which is not necessarily big on Thanksgiving. I like moist stuffing. Usually even oyster stuffing is, I think, really good, although I have to claim that Lisa or the girls do more of that work than I do, so I'm a eater, not as much of a preparer, but I clean a pretty mean table afterwards. And I do hope I know it's hard to imagine that Thanksgiving is only a couple weeks away, and God willing, we will, have some of these things sorted out. We won't be going through a government shutdown. We'll have a path to not only help Israel, provide humanitarian aid for those in need, support our allies in Ukraine, and maybe we'll be able to take a moment of thanks, because even with all of these challenges, we still live in the greatest country in the world. And I go back again to my earlier comment about the rise of anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Islamophobia, or a rise of Islamophobia. I guess it's a contradiction to say anti, but this great American experiment is that we're going to put us all into this melting pot, and what better than Thanksgiving and to build that analogy, and we're going to find a way where we can disagree with each other and still respect each other. And all of those kind of most basic American values are being challenged right now. And I implore all of my fellow Virginians and fellow Americans that we all need to step up, and doesn't mean change our views, doesn't mean we shouldn't advocate for our position, but hopefully, again, do it with a similar respect.
Senator, we're going to go to Hannah Brandt with Nexstar.
Usually Amy gets the last question. That would be a much better one last. All right, go ahead, Hannah.
Yeah, sorry, mine is not as fun, but I appreciate you taking it anyways. I wanted to ask you about immigration funding, and I know you briefly addressed that you would love to find a solution to that problem, but it seems like this is something, lawmakers have been trying and failing to pass legislation on for years now. So are you concerned that Republicans' effort to do it now is disingenuous, and that what it'll actually do is end up just blocking funding to Ukraine?
Well, I hope that's not the case. It would be a historic mistake, literally rivaling some of the mistakes that were made leading up to the beginning of World War II, if a year and a half in, almost 2 years into this war, America walked away from Ukraine. We'd be in effect walking away from NATO as well, in terms of all the allies who have put in their weapons and enormous amounts of humanitarian aid. So I hope my Republican friends are doing this with good faith, and I'm going to accept them at their word. There's a working group that is working on this. I said I'd volunteer to be part of it, but the complexity of some of these rules, they are tough. I mean, for example, the idea that, somebody who's coming to America seeking asylum, I'm very intrigued with the idea that the first safe country they are in, they got to apply for asylum there. Or if you've got a group of people, there was a recent story of a number of Haitians who'd been living in Chile literally for years that suddenly then decided they'd come to the border in the United States to apply for asylum. I got to understand better why changing that isn't a good idea. So I am supportive of not only additional funding for the border, but some reasonable policy changes. What I'm not, and this will be the question that we're going to have to sort through, is if my Republican friends in the Senate take the kind of what was called H.R. 2, which is kind of a right-wing wish list that would dramatically change the whole character of our country in terms of being a country that has any kind of friendliness to immigrants. That's not where I would go, and that's not where I think the vast majority of Americans would go. So we're probably not going to solve it all right now. I'd love to make sure that folks like Dreamers get their day. But we've seen with immigration, when we try to do comprehensive, it breaks apart. So if we can do additional border security funding, improve the process, not have folks have to wait a couple of years before they get their court case, count me in for a compromise there. But I hope they will keep it narrow so we can get to yes, and again, recognize that we've got also a historic choices in front of us in terms of supporting Israel, providing humanitarian aid for those in need, particular innocent Palestinians, and also not leaving Ukraine behind.
Senator, our final question will be Danielle Sandler with WVNS. Danielle? All right, Senator, that was all the questions we had.
All right. Thanks, everybody.